digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined once again by Steve from Amplified Robot, and we have with us returning Brian Baglow from Team Rock, who is also joined by his colleague Paul Leishman from Team Rock. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey, Tanya.
Hiya.
Hi, Tanya.
So would you care to explain, just to remind our audience exactly what it is you do? And let's start with you, Brian. Tell us exactly what it is that you're doing with Team Rock.
Team Rock is a music media company. We come from the traditional end of the market, so magazines and radio primarily. But the company knows that the future is digital, it's online, it's interactive, and it's mobile. So we're now finding new ways to allow our users, readers, listeners, and players to interact with the music they love in new and exciting ways.
Wonderful, thank you. And Steve, why don't you tell us all about what you're up to with Amplified Robot?
Right, Tanya. Well, as you know, Amplified Robot's a sort of studio/lab/agency in AR and VR space. And right now, the sort of main things we're working on medical realities, which is using virtual reality to train doctors, surgeons, and medical students. We're also working on a great project, which is reimagining games in virtual reality. And we're working with a big children's publisher in America to add augmented reality and virtual reality to their books.
Wonderful, thank you. And Paul, why don't you tell us about what you do in Team Rock?
Well, Team Rock,
Whatever he's told.
Whatever I'm told, yeah. So I work heavily on the game side of things at Team Rock. So my job is to manage the development of games projects, any kind of games-based technology or anything to do with the kind of the games side of things. So generally what Brian tells me to do, I tell others to do.
Okay, well, welcome to the show. We're going to talk today about the evolution of technology and culture. And I find it quite interesting because actually we kind of have an example of that in action right now, which is that we're utilizing a technology in the form of Skype to have a conversation between two of us who are in different locations in London and the two of you who are up in Scotland. And I think this is a really great example of how we have allowed technology to influence the way that we interact as human beings. And I'm curious from your perspective, Brian, whether or not you see there being a significant impact in the way that people are utilizing technology and have allowed that technology to just change, not necessarily in a significant way, but in subtle ways, the way that they live their everyday lives or the cultural impact that it has on their everyday lives.
It absolutely has. I mean, one of the great things about the current generation of technology is that, to borrow a contentious phrase over the last couple of weeks, democratized, not content creation, but also distribution, monetization, and consumption. So the tools to allow people to go out and actually make things digitally are now so widespread and so, low cost or indeed free that, filmmaking, game creation, audio creation, any old Tom, Dick or Harry or Tanya can now make a podcast, for example. So I think there's a real sea change in terms of how people are actually making things, even down to the simplest things like memes and GIFs and that sort of thing. We're now sharing those and making use of those and reusing and repurposing things created by the industries on an almost daily basis. So I think it's incredibly powerful, and we've only really started to see the very, very basics being explored. I think there's going to be an awful lot of really interesting stuff coming up as, the new generations, the digital natives, really start to find their feet and bypass the old existing industries and do things simply because they can and because they want to.
It's interesting that you're talking about this younger generation who's going to be kind of experiencing things in a completely different way because of the nature of technology, and you're talking about what this next exciting new thing will be. And I'm curious, Steve, from your perspective, what your take is on things like, for example, electronic tattoos or the digital tattoos, whatever you want to call them these days, but that idea of skin being the next user interface. What's your sentiment on that?
Well, that's an interesting point of view. I've seen some sort of wearables as well, which is actually using your skin to actually project on as well. So your forearm, for instance, becomes your mobile phone. So all the buttons and they're are projected on your on your forearm, and so your actual phone becomes something you wear around your wrist, and it actually can be a lot smaller than the watches that are around now. So that can be something. And I suppose people are really unafraid. The sort of the new generation is really, I think, really game for adopting anything, and there's no fear. I think in the past, sometimes people had a lot of fear about technology. I think a lot of that fear doesn't exist anymore, and it makes it really anybody younger than sort of 35 actually is so much at home. They've grown up with the internet. They know exactly how to use it, and that coupled with the rise of social media, and also how intelligent and sort of smartphones are now. I mean, you can do things on smartphones that, as you may be aware, my background's in film and television. Basically, an iPhone is a sort of a complete production unit in one go. You can have, you can film things, but also you can edit things and you can record things, and also you can broadcast from it as well.
Indeed. So I'm curious, because one of the things that you said there was about this idea of fear and people not being as afraid anymore of the technology. But in the context of conversations around things like AI, there is actually a certain kind of, group who would like to indicate that actually there is a lot to fear. I'm not going to name names, but maybe certain Mr. Hawkins or other such illustrious people have indicated that perhaps, humans being in control of AI or developing AI is not a wise thing. And I know that we pulled you away, Paul, from your Steam controller. So I'm assuming that you do enjoy your technology. I'm curious what your take is on this idea of fearing the unknown of the technology. Would you, for example, trust an autonomous vehicle to drive you around the country?
I, for one, trust our robot overlords, just for the record, just in case they do rise up and take over. And
listen to podcasts.
And listen to podcasts. I'm actually quite excited about it, the self-driving cars especially, because I'm a very lazy person. And just having something that will drive me about the place sounds brilliant.
So not to burst your bubble on that one or anything, but I did read a story very recently that there has now been the first official fatality from using self-driving vehicle, and so it's not that it's not safe. These things do happen, but I'm just saying you might not want to put your complete faith in your mechanical overlords. Just saying.
But it's the same with everything. There's that. Every day you go in a car, there could be a human error, yourself or another driver, that can instantly take you out. So it's not. I read the same story in the BBC, and it's not a kind of worrying thing. Technology will always improve, but I, for one, I've kind of jumped in the whole streaming thing, kind of feet first. I don't have a TV license because I don't see the point. Got everything that I need to. I would like to watch at my fingertips.
So how would you feel when they change the things like the TV license to include all things that are digital or streaming? Will you feel that they're perhaps infringing on your right to be able to stream as you see fit?
Not really. I went, damn, they finally caught up.
Okay.
It's one of those things, because I watched BBC content as well, and I know the TV license goes towards paying for that content. So I'm not too down about it. I'm just surprised it took them this long to catch up.
But then, having said that, sometimes these things do move quite slowly. I'm curious though, in terms of the technologies that are exciting or interesting. We talk about this era where things like mobile phones will become obsolete, and I'm curious, Brian, from your perspective, what you think that next thing is going to be. Whether it is this whole idea of skin-based UIs. Do you think that that's going to be the next thing, or do you think there's going to be another device that will replace the mobile phone?
It's a very interesting question, because there are a couple of different ways that it could go. So, at the moment we have a growing number of wearables which are connected through a single processing unit, which is your mobile phone. So that's kind of acting as the CPU for all of these different devices. Now, whether that remains or whether it becomes far more distributed so that you don't actually need the mobile phone to tie everything together because everything is just becoming cloud-based, I think is one of those discussions that could go on and on and on. So it kind of remains to be seen. The whole idea of the smart devices. So you talked about the tattoos. Google have got the contact lens that can help measure your blood sugar levels or something along those lines. I think there's going to be a growing number of these kind of devices which are increasingly augmenting, various parts of the sort of the human experience, but are not necessarily tied to a single device, but are very single purpose. So you've got something that's very specifically to help you lose weight, or something that's very specifically to help you measure your blood sugar, that kind of thing. So I can see the mobile phone becoming less of an issue simply because there's going to be more and more processing power in all of these individual devices. So, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we actually see a point where the mobile phone becomes, if not obsolete, then certainly, not necessary to the overall experience.
I hear you. But one of the things that I find quite curious about everything that you're saying there is that all of the types of outcomes of the technology that you're referring to is very, very specific to a productive outcome. But I'm curious in terms of things that have more of a cultural importance, whether that's in the form of performance, artistic, mental or emotional health. I'm curious, Steve, from your perspective, where you see technology having an impact on these things that are slightly less tangible than perhaps, being able to say, hey, you know what, my car drives itself. Or, if I use this wearable, it's going to turn on my TV at home, or that very specific action, to something that's perhaps a little bit more difficult to quantify.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of work to be done on this. I'll just sort of touch back onto the sort of car driving thing and the crash, because I was listening to a very interesting podcast from MIT a couple of days ago, and they're actually working on programming these cars, and they're having to come up with questions about, if I'm going to crash into a crowd of people, should I save the crowd of people, or at the expense of somebody else inside the car perhaps dying? So there are all these sort of moral conundrums which are starting to come up. And interestingly enough, the everybody that are on the sort of survey that they were doing said, oh well, of course the person inside the car must die before you kill sort of 2 or 3 people on the sidewalk. And then they asked a supplementary question was, well, would you buy a car that actually had that ability? And everybody said no. So you're going to get sort of 2 different conflicting signals about what people would like to have happen and what could happen.
I find this really interesting, Steve, because I think it is that thing of when you're talking about it in the context of somebody else, it's fine, let them be sacrificed. But when you're talking about, would you own that? Would you, participate in that? Then it immediately becomes a self-preservation thing of actually, maybe I'd rather not. And I think it's really interesting what you're asking, because it kind of almost alludes onto the question that was kind of inherent in the film I, Robot, where the robot makes a choice to save Will Smith's character over the little girl who is in the other car that he crashed into. And the robot chose to save Will Smith because he was closer and it was easier to save him. And the little girl's risk or chances of survival were a lot less. And inherently, as far as a human would be concerned, the answer to a conundrum like that should always be, save the child. You want to save the child, even if there is less possibility of survival. So sometimes logic isn't necessarily the solution. And I find it curious that when we're talking about these ethical questions that need to be programmed into things like vehicles, whether or not there is a certain degree of it's not about the logic of the solution, but more about the way that humans think and the way that we believe in survival of it's always kind of the women and children first, if that makes sense,
Absolutely, it becomes the ultimate moral question, doesn't it? And I was also in America over the last couple of weeks, and I was attending a couple of medical conferences, and there's also going to be the possibility, which happens now on sort of test trials, where people have implants in their body, which is again routed through the mobile phone, which is actually sending information back to a hospital or doctors. and then that's which could be very good, and it could save somebody's life, or sort of, and that could be fantastic. But of course, once you've got something implanted inside you, can that be hijacked? Can somebody else overtake it? Can it be hacked?
I'm curious, therefore, to know, Brian, would you swallow a smart pill? These smart pills being the technology that's encapsulated inside the container of a pill, and once you swallow it, the pill breaks apart, and then you have the actual technology, going into your digestive system, and it's actually powered by your stomach acid. So it will always have power for as long as you're essentially alive. So it's always going to be working, and it's always going to be in your body. So would you swallow a smart pill, knowing that it's going to be there for the rest of your life?
It depends entirely on the context. I mean, yes, I think the uses of technology and the fact that we are getting to the point where we can actually have all of these incredible new, in some ways, augmentations that will help improve our quality of life, our health, our fitness and everything. When you look at it on a purely theoretical level, that's going to be awesome. When you look at it on the level of, say, big pharma and the way that the healthcare systems around the world, in the UK, yes, probably. If I was in the US, probably not. Again, it comes back to if you want to look at the self-driving cars and the algorithms, does it save you? Does it save the pedestrians? That's going to become a selling point. The only car on the market that kills them, you. So I think as soon as these theoretical or conceptual, hypothetical technologies hit the market, we're going to have some fairly robust ethical guidelines. And let's be honest, common sense has never been the market's strong point, regardless of what Adam Smith said in the 17th century. So I'm pretty sure as these technologies move forward, there are going to be some fairly fundamental questions to be asked. Who knew when the first 3D printers were invented that they would be being used by and large to create assault rifles?
Well, that's an interesting choice of item to 3D print. But I do hear that there are people who are using these 3D printers to actually print things like prosthetics for limb replacements. And, people are using them in good ways as well, Brian. There's not just bad things.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. The technology is neither good nor bad. It's the use to which it is put. But in a lot of cases, what we're finding, and the internet is a prime example of this, which is technology races far, far ahead of the lawmakers and the ethical, questions that are being asked. And in some cases, that can be great. The internet has been a transformative tool in the sort of evolution of mankind and allowing us to communicate and allowing us to participate in things we would never otherwise have been able to do so. But at the same time, there's some really weird, sick and freaky stuff out there that you wouldn't necessarily want friends or family members to, be involved with.
So I'm curious then, on that basis, when we're talking about this idea of certain types of people, and I'm going to say developers in the nicest, most affectionate possible way, are at the very front edge of creating new technologies, whether that is hardware or software or services, that oftentimes there isn't a huge amount of ethical or moral discussion happening at that very front edge of the wave. And I'm curious, Paul, from your perspective, being that, you dabble in making and creating content and creating experiences, whether or not you think there should be more of the moral and ethical question being asked at those early stages when there isn't really anybody there to really stand up for the consumer or the general public in terms of maybe, it's not necessarily the best thing to be creating a, game or a software or a hardware that does something that isn't necessarily perhaps beneficial to the general public.
Well, that's a good question. It's one of those things that completely depends on the software or the development being made. Most developers, when they're making a software, don't see any problem with it. For everyone being different, they have different kind of moral strands and see things in different light. So it's quite a hard one to judge from, say, a innocent kind of U-rated game to the GTA kind of 18 level violence. It's like, where do you stop? Some developers don't see the wrongs with GTA. Myself, it's satire of how the world works, really, to me. But some people might not see it that way, and some people don't. So it's quite hard, because if we start putting in these kind of fail safes, it's then fail safes to protect the general public. Are we just
self-censoring?
Yeah, self-censoring. Are we being a nanny state? For things like the self-driving cars, the moral question behind it is that we should probably write up a set of rules that these AIs have to follow. Because at the end of the day, we have to make sure there's a standard there that all smart AI enhanced cars can follow.
Okay, so in that same vein then, for example, with things like drones, we're kind of, it started out with the technology that people are playing around with and they're happily flying their drones around. But there's very little in the way of regulation or law that's stopping people from doing really stupid things. Like, for example, at the moment, there are wildfires happening in Canada and the police and fire rescue services are being hindered by all of these random drone operators who are flying their drones in the path of the rescue services who are trying to essentially control these fires. Do we think that there should perhaps be a little bit more in the way of guidance and somebody stepping up to the front of these things as they emerge, these new technologies and these new fields, and saying, you know what, it's great that we've created the technology, but actually here's the way that people should be utilizing, or here's the parameters for guidance that you should be thinking about?
Yeah, there should be, kind of in the short answer. But it depends completely on technology. People are going to do stupid things no matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a stick or a drone or a 3D printer. Mm-hmm. Somewhere out there is going to do something really, really stupid with it. It's just basically in our nature, really, to do stupid things, bits of things we find. Well,
there's a phenomenon in games that you may or may not have heard of, Tanya, which is called time to cock.
Time to what?
So, time to cock.
Yeah.
Which is any given piece of software which allows people to express themselves or build things or make things or do things. It's basically a matter of minutes before the first person will create a huge artificial penis with it.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard it called that before, but yes, I am aware of it.
Yes. So, it's you give people the power to do things, and the first thing they're going to do is do unbelievably stupid or irresponsible things.
Actually,
and so as the technology moves forward, you kind of want guidelines, but then again, do we want governments of the world legislating on technologies when they seem to be afraid of electricity, fire, the internet, computer screens, and the colour blue?
Sticks.
It's interesting you say this, though, because it does make me think back to the recent chatbot thing where they had the chatbot. I forget whose chatbot it was now, but they managed to unleash it to the public and the general public, the magic of the internet managed to teach it to be really evil, spewing nasty hatred type messages.
Anti-Semitic in under a day.
And so I suppose the issue at hand is, do we as humans, are we ultimately flawed in the fact that actually all technology is always going to be instructed by a human, and humans themselves are flawed? So ultimately everything we create will essentially have a bias, will have a flaw in some way, shape or form. That is an open question to the floor.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, I think that things themselves, going back to the gun question, I mean, the guns don't kill people. It's the people using the guns that kill people. So it's the sort of like I'm against censorship in all forms, and I think I love the internet and I love what it does, and I think that it opens up everything to everybody. But as we all know, it's sort of that when you don't want censorship in one area, again, that opens up possibilities of things that the moral dilemmas about child porn and things like that. It's very difficult. I don't think we should always sort of castigate the actual medium itself. It's the messengers that we should be actually sort of trying to regulate. But I think Brian was right. I think he said that things are moving very fast in all these fields, and therefore really governments and regulators are struggling to catch up. Not least in terms of the judiciary who don't know, who actually try and stop people finding out about who slept with who or who's done some really stupid thing and decided that they've got a lot of money and they're going to try and stop anybody from finding out about it by putting a court order there. But it's completely undone because within 5 minutes of searching on the internet, you can find out exactly who it is.
So it's interesting that you talk about this, because one of the things that I think is really interesting is the fact that we're in this era, this age of technology, if you like, that actually facilitates this real change in attitude from a cultural perspective, culturally, we've kind of accelerated the way in which we open ourselves to new experiences and new ideas and new concepts. And I think some of the recent things that we've been seeing lately indicate just how far we've come in as much as I recall that there was a recent sit-in in a certain house in America in terms of Democrats deciding that they were going to sit in and try and lobby for certain things to happen. And interestingly, when they turned the cameras off, immediately the people who were in that sit-in just picked up their mobile phones and started streaming it and continued to, communicate and articulate their messages to people who were following proactively what they were doing. Now, I believe it lasted for about 25 hours or some such like, but the fact that they were able to facilitate that to happen by just picking up their phone and saying, it doesn't matter that you're not going to let us do this, on the TV system within the house. Actually, we're going to just share it ourselves. We're going to do this ourselves because anybody can do that. I think it's a real indicator of the attitude that we have now culturally, that we can do whatever we need to do. It's very instantaneous. It's very in the moment. And we're very much a culture that expects instant response and instant action in a way that we didn't used to. I know that for a fact, Brian, I saw on your Facebook feed the day after the Brexit, I hesitate to use that word, vote, after the referendum, I saw the petition come up on your Facebook feed. And it's that idea that we would immediately say, you know what, we're going to put a petition up and we want everybody to sign this petition because we want to take it back, or whatever it is we might want to do. But the idea that we as a culture, as a society, believe we have that right and believe that we can do that, I think is quite interesting. I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Brian.
Well, this is one of the things, if you look at things from a games perspective, starting as one of the purely digital media out there, one of the purely digital art forms, and from the very earliest days, the industry, we've had a lot more interaction with the users and a lot more direct interaction with the people who are playing the games. Some of the earliest forums and some of the earliest communities on the internet were built up around video games. And even way, way back in the sort of the mists of time, when we did the original Grand Theft Auto, we had people contacting us going, I want to set up a website about this game. And it was like, what? Are you crazy? That sounds mental. But, we gave them the skills, we gave them the abilities. And within a matter of months of the game coming out, people had cracked it and were starting to build tools to allow themselves to modify it and create their own maps. And so if you are doing something which has value to people, which people can get passionate about, then they want to interact. Increasingly, people are not content to sit back and be a passive audience, but, for something they really value, they want to be an active participant. And the smart creators, the smart media companies out there are building that capability into whatever it is they're doing, whether it's the content they create or distribute, or whether it's a community or forum around a particular type of content. And what we're seeing is this is spreading out. Again, it's the democratization of this, and the short-circuiting of the contact channels. So the biggest digital companies out there at the moment are the ones that are removing the barriers and sort of filling in the knowledge gaps. People like Uber and Airbnb are putting people with space together with people who need somewhere to stay, or people who need to get somewhere with people with cars. So it's bypassing an awful lot of the old infrastructure where you simply didn't know who the hell to talk to, and it's facilitating that. The petition is a perfect example. The trend of technology at the moment is towards direct democracy. So for electing representatives, we could be getting asked, multiple times a day, should we do this? Should we do that? Should we vote out of the EU? Should we remain? It's like, should we set fire to Michael Gove? Should we go down to Boris's house and steal his bicycle? We could be doing all of these things.
Brian, thank you for making this a political podcast in one fell swoop.
Those were theoretical examples. I was not advocating a point of view or political stance of any description.
Okay,
and
just checking.
If you do any of those things, you're very clearly an idiot.
Okay, but moving on to the kind of the point about this idea of being able to have participation and direct kind of communication and that peer-to-peer almost relationship with the content creator or the software or hardware owner and the audience in question. I think this is quite interesting from a medical perspective, because we're seeing that trend as well in terms of this idea of we have all these fitness wearables and these things that allow us to track how we are physically and our physical health. And that we're getting to that stage where give it a few years' time and we'll be able to have these very much peer-to-peer conversations with our doctor, where we're not walking into the doctor and saying, hey, tell me what's wrong with me, but we're walking in and saying, look, these are my results, this is my data, and I've had a look at my data and I think this is what my issue is, or my data is indicating that this problem is potentially afoot. And you're having this very equal level footing of conversation with your GP, with your doctor, rather than the traditional relationship of authority from a doctor saying, this is what I believe is wrong with you. So, Steve, I'm curious to understand from your perspective whether you see that trend becoming the norm from a cultural perspective in the next kind of 5 years.
Yeah, I think for sure it will do. I mean, I think that telemedicine especially is going to sort of be driving this. And if it's done properly, it works really well, because your phone can be sort of storing, or your watch for that matter, could be storing information about yourself, and about perhaps any pills you're taking, or perhaps a condition that you have. And when you get to the doctor can actually instantly interact with your phone or your watch, and he can download specific information, which enables him to give a much, rather than spending a typical sort of doctor-patient talk will last about 20 minutes. The first 10 minutes is trying to find out what was wrong, and people trying to articulate how they feel, and that can be very difficult. Whereas in one fell swoop, the doctor can actually plug into that information, see it on the screen, and in actual fact, he's got more time to actually sort of deal with you as a person, because he's actually downloaded a lot of intricate data that actually will help lead him to the right conclusions, hopefully. So I think that type of thing is definitely going to expand. I think it's probably the actual telemed side that's actually going to help in that.
Okay.
And I think they're also going to be a sort of a driver of this, perhaps slightly less so on the medical side in the UK, but certainly in America, because I think a lot of this stuff is driven by money and about can you save money. For instance, I think insurance companies could be very, very interested in this, because if it saves insurance companies money in the treatment of patients, I think that they'll actually make it very attractive for people to sort of buy into this type of technology.
I fully agree with you on that. But I'm curious, gentlemen, to understand from your perspective, what is the technology or the trend or the new thing that excites you most in terms of whether that's a technological change or a cultural shift? What is it that you feel is going to be the big thing that has impact, whether that is on how you do business or on your industry in general? What do you think that thing is going to be? And I'm going to start with you, Brian, because you've had the most experience answering this question.
Yeah, I think this is my fourth time of answering it. So let me summon up something that you've not heard before. Gamification.
That's not a new word, that's an old word.
Okay, business rules automation. How's that? Let's recontextualize this process map. Gamification in terms of all of the devices we've been talking about, all of the more distributed Internet of Things, are going to start measuring your everyday activities, your everyday life, and start to talk to each other. And how we tie those together and make them, respond to what you do, recognize your activities, how you trigger stuff, and then how you respond to it is going to be massive. So, if you walk more than a certain number of steps a day, the government gives you money off, or gives you certain rewards because you're hitting your healthy living trend, or, your Tesco club card points are analysed and you get extra bonus because you didn't buy those 3 bottles of whiskey and black pudding that you normally get on a daily basis.
Have you seen that video that somebody put together of the future of what AR is going to look like? Because it sounded awfully suspiciously like your gamified future.
Yeah, well, I basically nicked this from Jesse Shell, who gave it. but the game Apocalypse, it's either going to fill you with delight or terrify you to your very soul. I think it's a bit of a balance between the two. I think it's going to be a fantastically good thing, but because it's going to be controlled by companies like Google, Apple and Facebook, you may want to know how to opt out or at least go and live in a cave somewhere.
Okay. Paul, what's your take on this?
I'm not actually 100% sure. I was trying to think of an answer. I'm kind of, in the short term, I'm actually looking forward to 8K TVs, sadly. And someone likes film, I think that's going to be revolutionary when we can, when we look through a monitor and it's the same resolution as our eyes. It'll be like looking out a window. And that seems pretty cool. As a gamer, that means more realistic worlds to kind of play around in. But I've just tried the Vive VR headset last week, and I was a bit skeptical at first about VR, but now after playing that, a room-based VR setup, I'm pretty converted. So more advancements in VR. I can't wait for it, especially in a room setup. I was moving around playing selfie tennis, so basically playing tennis with myself, and it was just amazing fun. It was great.
Which is how they did it in the medieval days. They just hit the ball up against the wall and you pretty much played with yourself. But Steve, what's your take on this? What's the thing that you think is going to be most exciting?
Oh, right. Well, it's a sort of like, the whole of the VR and AR side I find it very exciting, as you know. I think that's, in general going to be a really sort of exciting ride for the next 5 years, especially. But I suppose that I didn't want to say this, but I think perhaps the thing that's really sort of grabbing my attention is AI at the moment, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out. I think we're all very much aware of the problems with artificial intelligence, but if we can rein it in so it doesn't take over everything, I think it could be fantastically useful for everybody. And I'm really excited about all the things that it can do, providing it doesn't go too far.
Okay.
Because I could side with Stephen Hawking on that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to throw this one in the ring because I've been using this phrase a lot lately, but I'm going to talk about the Internet of Beings as the next big thing that I think is going to be really interesting. The decentralization of manufacture and service and product, and the idea that the individual has value in the economy and the ecosystems. I think that's incredibly interesting going forward. So I'd be interested to see how some of these technologies, things like AI, things like electronic tattoos or digital tattoos, and the idea of the skin as the UI or the human as the UI or the interaction point is going to be really interesting going forward. So I'm curious to see how that turns out. Internet of Beings, remember that phrase. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that we give our lovely listeners a way to find out a little bit more about what you're up to and to follow you or hound you, whatever the case may be, by asking you to share with us your social media handle of choice. And I'm going to start with you, Brian.
You can reach me at @flackboy on Twitter, or my alternative is @Scottish Games if you want to know anything about the games industry in Scotland, or the day job is @Team Rock Games.
You can't settle for one, you have to have all three. Paul, what would be your social media handle of choice?
Social media, that's a good one. I'd be @PixelSword1 when I post things up there, and be @Team Rock Games as well for all things Team Rock and games. Okay,
wonderful. And Steve, what about your good self?
I'll just stick to one, Tanya. It's @AR Reality. That's capital A, small r, capital R, small e, small a, small l, small I, small t, small y.
You had to figure out how to spell it there for a moment, didn't you?
I did. It's a sort of, it's one of those sort of things that you say it so often, and then you think, actually, well, is it reality? Oh, yes, it is. Yes. So I was being ultra cautious there.
No, you got it right. It's good. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content and you would like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter @DigitalJamLTD.
digitaljamsessions.com